Thank you very much, and welcome back to another week, another weekend conversation about Kenya's politics, about Kenya's economic issues, and about Kenya's social affairs. This last weekend, we buried one of the most profound women I have met, because I have had the privilege to meet her, Mukami Kimathi, who passed on a week or so ago, and she was buried in Jabini. And I must say that the way she was buried is an indication of who she was in this country. And it was interesting, especially from a political perspective, to realize that in her funeral, or at her funeral, was the first time we had the two protagonists of last year's elections coming together in the same space. Only Mukami would have made something like that happen. May her soul rest in peace. May God comfort her family. And I want to congratulate her family and the entire Dedan Kimathi family for the amount of work and effort they have put to keep the name of Dedan Kimathi alive for over close to 60 years since he passed away. And to just make sure that this country does not forget him. And I pray that the promises that were made by His Excellency the President, William Ruto, and the Deputy President, that they will actually put in some efforts to find the remains of Dedan Kimathi, to be able to give him a befitting burial, and to remove his remains from prison, even if it's just figuratively, in terms of the country acknowledging the sacrifice of this man and many like him, who paid the ultimate price for the freedom of this country. But as I said, may Mukami Kimathi's soul rest in peace. I want to talk about two books as a beginning of my conversation this week. The first book was by Saida Bao Kanchori. Let me just call him Kanchori. Kanchori wrote a book, Why Baba is Not the Fifth. And that book was quite an interesting look into what happened in last year's election. And it's true, there have been a lot of conversations about why Raila did not make it. The assumption was that was his election. I mean, it was the closest he had come to having everything that he had going into that election. He had the support of an incumbent president, 100% support. Due to that, the head of state being behind him, the assumed support of the government, though of course we know for a fact that wasn't the case. But yes, he had a head of state, commander-in-chief of the armed forces, supporting him. And the elements within the government that were loyal to the president supported Raila Odinga. Deep state system, as we hear, and many of us who might not have been able to do the same thing had Uhuru not taken that position, supported him. And we have had an argument and a discussion for the last close to over 9 months, about why Raila lost that election. I do not want to go back into that conversation. I think it has been it's been explored quite a bit. What I would like to look at takes me to the next book, and that was Aden Duale's book that he released last week, On Record. Was it called On the Record? I'm really hoping to get that copy. I haven't gotten that copy. I spoke to Waziri Duale last week, and he told me he's going to send me a signed copy, and I'm going to remind him. He owes me that book. I'm really looking forward to read that book. I read some of the excerpts. I got to see the forward in parts of the media, and of course various glimpses to some of the comments and some of the stories you expect to find in that book, and I'm really looking forward to read it. These two books are interesting, and every time I meet somebody who's been in Kenyan politics for a long time, I want to urge them. And this is something I even told the retired president, Uhuru Kenyatta, one of the moments when I met with him, that I pray that he writes a book for anybody who wants to learn about how politics is done, especially in a setting like ours. It would be amazing to get books from some of these people. I would love. Now we have a book on Raila Odinga. Aden Duale has done his book. We've got books by Mudi Awori, we've got a book by Kalonzo Musyoka, we've got a book by Gigi Kariuki, we have a book. I'm trying to remember, I've read a lot of those books, and they're interesting. I mean, of course, every book is biased from the person. Moi had a book. They're biased because of the person who's doing it. But if you read many of them, you get to be able to balance them, and you get to have a very good glimpse of what has been happening and an understanding. Because we're told if you want to learn, you can either learn from your own experience or you can learn from the experiences of others. If you read other people's books, you learn their experiences in a condensed format, and you don't have to go through the same things yourself. Some of the mistakes we make, including us, young and growing politicians, are because you do not know how some things happen, you know. And if you got access to enough books and you read enough of the stories of the people who've gone before us, I suspect we would not make as many mistakes. And this country will be the better for it, because you're able to go back and research and realize, okay, if you do this, this is what happens. If you do this, this is what happens. So I really, really pray enough people are going to write books. One of the books I'm looking forward to reading would be a book on William Ruto. I would love to read a book about how William Ruto won the 2022 elections. I'm sure, of course, it would not have its own grey areas, but it would be interesting, because that's one topic that has not been explored enough. And I have spent some time just thinking about this. In fact, when I was just preparing myself for this particular interview, I went back to the day of his inauguration, 13th of September 2022. And I remember noting on that day that he went for an inauguration, which I can imagine must be an intense emotional affair. He went for a luncheon. Then he had a meeting with the US delegation and another meeting with the Germany delegation. And then he did an executive order paper on the judiciary, on the judges who had not been appointed. The next day, he had a couple of meetings, including the swearing in of the judges who had not been admitted. And I just thought about it, and I'm like, just thinking about if this had been somebody else who had been elected, there could have most probably been a week set up in party mode, you know, just celebrating that you have won. Ruto got to work, and as is on record, and it's not hidden, that some of us have not been his supporters, he's not been a favorite of ours. But sometimes it's important to understand a person, especially when that person becomes a person who's running the country that you call home. And I've just spent some time just trying to understand President William Ruto for purposes of understanding where we're going as a country. And the one thing I note that most people do not have, who have been president of this country, is his work ethic. That example of what happened during his inauguration is just a beginning. The amount of work that Ruto tends to get done, just listening to people who work closely with him, and I have friends among them, what time he gets to work, how cabinet meetings run, how they don't get late. If it's running from this time to this time, it runs from that time to that time. If he tells you, he gives you an appointment for 7 o'clock, you can be sure he's going to be in that room at a few minutes to 7. And this is amazing for presidents, because it used to be said that the meeting starts when the president gets there. So it didn't matter. I mean, we've had in the last administration, the running joke used to be you'd be called for a meeting, and it most probably would start 2 or 3 hours after you were asked to get to where you were supposed to get. So I can imagine, I mean, I remember recently when the president was announcing this conversation about the bipartisan, the beginning of the bipartisan dialogue. The media guys actually got to State House late. And I can imagine they must have been so used to being called for presidential press conferences that started 1 or 2 hours later than they had been called, that you could tell they were shocked that this particular one started exactly on time. That's the one thing you note about William Ruto. His work ethic, his punctuality, his consistency. During the last 5 years up to 2022 August, the one thing you noticed about him is that he seemed to have a schedule of how he went for campaigns, and it was consistent. After he became president, We have noticed how every Sunday when he's been around, he goes for a multi-denominational function, church function at a different county. And it's consistent. You start seeing a predictability about how he works that is interesting and different from what you'd expect from somebody who is president. Something else you pick, and this is something you pick from Duale's book, from the excerpts I have read, is his loyalty to his people. Loyalty is an interesting thing. And I really pray that he's going to maintain that particular trait, because unfortunately it tends to happen a lot of the times when you're going into office. And when you get into office, it tends to fade away. When you look at Ed Ndwele, I watched his interview with Jeff Koinange on the bench when he was talking about his book. And Jeff asked him whether you want to run for president. He said, why would I want to run for president? The words he uses, my buddy is a commander-in-chief and the president of the Republic of Kenya. And I am a CS for defense. I've done my part, And loyalty begets loyalty. When you're loyal to people you work with, they are loyal to you and they're committed to your cause. This is something we have seen with the team that has been around William Ruto. And I know I keep hearing people complaining he's employing his friends, he's employing people known to him. And sometimes I want to ask myself, and I want to ask them, if you are president and you are running a country like Kenya, why would you give a critical job to somebody you do not know? If you knew somebody, you can actually give that job. He has managed to move forward with a lot of his team, all the way from university days. You see a lot of the relationships he has go back quite a number of years. And that tells you something about the kind of person he is. The other thing is focus. I don't think anybody can argue with the fact that William Ruto is very, very focused. I remember the amount of effort that was thrown at him to disorganize him over the last 5 years before he became president. Somehow he's managed to sustain his focus. He managed to sustain his resilience. He was resilient enough and he stayed on course. And that's something else that actually stands out about him. So I would love to read a book about him. I would love to read a book about the last election. I suspect he's close to 10 years older than me, as I keep saying. I haven't left the political field. I still hope and pray that to continue participating in the national politics of this country. And I want to learn. I love to learn. And I have learned a lot from Uhuru Kenyatta. I have learned from Mwai Kibaki. I learned from even my peers. And William Ruto is somebody I would want to read a book about. So as we read Ed Ndwele's book, as we read Kanchori's book, as we talk about why Raila lost the election, I want to challenge the team around William Ruto. Please do for us a book about how William Ruto won the 2022 elections. It will be a worthy read for a lot of us who are interested in understanding and who are unbiased. I know we were not on the same side, but once an election is over, and I have been very, very consistent on that part, once an election is over, that man who wins the election becomes my president as well. And I want him to succeed. And I pray for him to succeed. Because if he fails, our country fails. So I want William to succeed. And I also want to learn from what it is that has gotten him to this part, especially against the kind of odds that he had running into the last election. So that would be some of the things, one of the things I'll be hoping is going to happen in the near future, at least before the next election, so that we can actually also learn and pick up points. But there are many things, personally, I pick just from watching him. His consistency, his focus. To some extent, something which surprises me because we didn't see that coming is an element of humility. During the funeral for Mukami, Raila Odinga walks in. I was just trying to think about it in any other setting. The president is already seated and his cabinet, the whole team is there. Then the leader of opposition walks in the middle of that function. And the president, at least he didn't come out. And he actually stood up to shake his hand. I try to imagine if it had been other people, how that would have gone. I don't think it would have gone well. So you sense that. You sense it around him, and for me it's surprising because that's the one thing we did not expect was going to happen based on how that campaign had been running. So we continue to pray that book is going to be written, and we hope you're going to get a chance to read it. And that is what I have to say in regards to that. As I finish this, last week I spent some time on the conversation about Jubilee, and I want to finish it with just one thing. President William Ruto is engaging Raila Odinga. We saw that. We had it. in the conversation during the funeral. They have a lot of respect, mutual respect for each other, and I suspect one way or the other, they will agree. Once they agree, as much as Raila is the head of Azimio, it is primarily ODM that is going to benefit from that conversation. I suspect that in the same vein, President Ruto is speaking to Kalonzo Musyoka. And even when they do agree, Wiper will benefit from that conversation. If he wanted to speak to Jubilee, if William Ruto wanted to speak, President Ruto wanted to speak to Jubilee, who would he speak to? Who in our party, at this moment in time, first would be willing to listen to William Ruto, and second would be recognized enough by our membership that whatever they agree on we could actually be accepted by us? This is a question I want to throw back to our party as we go through these wrangles, as we plan ourselves, as we organize ourselves, as we decide who is the king, who is the leader of this party of ours, as the various functions just for space. We need to ask ourselves as a party, if today the government wanted to engage us as they are engaging the other parties who are members of the opposition or who are under Azimio, who has a mandate to talk to William Ruto? Who would be able to listen to William Ruto? Who would William Ruto be able to listen to? And how would that be received by the rank and file of the party? This is food for thought for us this week, and I hope somebody is listening. As always, sisi bado tuko hapa Rware. We still keep preparing very good nyama choma, chai mandazi, pilau, and we pray that you continue coming and visiting with us. And let's see. Let's add value where we can. Let's grow our country as we prepare for the politics that is ahead of us. Thank you very much. God bless you. God bless Kenya.